Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cozy Corner Chronicles. I'm Julia,
And I'm Liz.
and we are back with our final chapter chat for A Little Life. So, thank you for everyone who has been following us along this very long and windy journey.
Yes, it's been a super long journey, but we're finally coming to the end of it. And honestly, I'm kind of sad that it's ending.
Me too. I felt like we really developed a very in depth relationship with this book because of all the trauma that we were reading about. So, here we are.
Definitely. So, do you want to kick us off with part six, chapter three?
Yes. So we are only left with part six, chapter three, and then part seven. So, part six, chapter three, as Jude finds himself unable to recover for Willem's death despite the passage of time, he embarks on a campaign of trying to kill himself indirectly. Rather than committing one act that will end his life, he weakens his body through near starvation in hopes that an infection will kill him. He finds that when he starves himself for long enough, he has hallucinations of Willem, which he enjoys and therefore actively tries to cause. He begins withdrawing from his social life completely, canceling all plans, and trying to conceal his alarming weight loss behind baggy clothes. One day, Andy pays him a surprise visit at his office and is stunned by his emaciated frame. Shortly after, a group of his closest friends gather to confront him, a confrontation that ends with their insistence on his forced hospitalization. At this point, he finally gives in to his anger completely, fighting back viciously as he is strapped to a hospital bed and put on a feeding tube. He is only released many days later with strict regulations. He must eat all his meals in someone's presence to ensure he is eating. He must see Andy regularly for physical checkups, and he must resume his therapy sessions. He chafes against these restrictions and treats those around him cruelly. Harold and Julia, Andy, and his therapist, Dr. Lohman. So he
Hmm.
attends the therapy only perfunctorily, not participating with any real effort. Finally, his anger reaches a climax at dinner with Harold and Julia. He insults Julia's cooking before shattering his plate against the wall. He prepares for Harold to finally hit him and eject him from the apartment, but instead, Harold embraces him, calling him his sweetheart. The lovingness of the gesture shocks Jude, and he collapses into Harold's arms. He realizes that with Harold and Julia, he finally has the experience that most children have in the earliest years, behaving badly, testing parental limits, and being loved anyway. No caregiver in his childhood ever loved him unconditionally, and this experience breaks his anger streak, and he makes a determination that he would be a better person and he would be a more loving one as well. He ends up resuming his sessions with Dr. Lohman and begins actually participating and talking through all of his tragedy, and then even voluntarily offering up all of this stuff in his past, which is a really big deal for him. He's finally opening up, like Anna had told him to.
Yeah, and then I feel like this is the point where I knew like he really was going to be gone at some point in this book because like
Yeah.
this whole time he was very reserved about all the things that happened prior in his life, and the fact that he was willing to open up, willing to talk to the therapist and all of that really showed me like this is probably going to be it.
Yeah, and I feel like the author does, they always give you a high only to give you a low.
Mhm.
So this was definitely the high of like he kind of gets the love that he deserves. He finally kind of accepts the love that he deserves, and then he begins talking about his trauma, and then of course like things are going to go downhill, right? So
Yeah, and I feel like for a moment this book was really hard for me to visualize because I couldn't I couldn't like picture their ages, if that makes sense.
yeah.
Like I know they would sit like the author would sit there and be like, "Oh, now Willem and Jude are 51." But like they didn't do things that were like 51ish,
Right,
if
like,
that
it
makes
still felt like they were
sense.
in their 20s.
Yeah.
I get what you mean, because yeah, I think even with Harold, like, by the end of the book, Harold's, like, what, 70, 80. But I swear he still moves around like he's, like, 20.
Right. It was a little different. But then we go into the last part of the story, which is part 7, and this is the shortest part of the book so far. Well, thus far, I guess. And it's also from Harold's perspective, and Harold is talking to Willem. So we start to see at the beginning of this that Harold is communicating to Willem, even though Willem at this point is already passed away. So the two always have talked about their inability to help Jude, especially while Willem was alive. And no matter what, like after Willem has passed away, there's just still no way that Harold can interject himself and help Jude. So Harold narrates this vacation to Rome that he and Julia had with Jude. Although Jude acts very, normal and happy, Harold can kind of feel him, like receding and just regressing. So he finds himself trying to get Jude to commit to things, long term projects, such as like co teaching a class or doing cooking lessons, so that he can feel that Jude is Jude has a goal to live, pretty much. And but of course, Jude never really makes promises to anybody, so he never really did that. So one day, Jude says that Dr. Loman thinks that it would be useful to tell Harold and Julia about his past. So he plans on writing it down and he tells Harold, I don't know how long it's going to take me to open up to you about all of this, but I promise you that one day I will. And so a year after the intervention, um, that you were talking about where they were forcing him to stay in the hospital, Jude actually does unalive himself by injecting his artery with just a little bit of air, which ended up giving him a stroke. Andy tells Harold that his death was painless and that it was fine, but obviously, Harold being Harold, he looked it up and he knows that it was actually very painful and that Andy was really just trying to spare his feelings. So of course, Jude left letters to all of his closest friends along with an updated will, and his letter to Harold was what he promised. Now, this is something that he did promise, and so it's the story of his past, and of course, an apology of, I guess, quote unquote, deceiving Harold and Julia for not revealing his story later, which I think we saw this throughout the story the whole entire time. He always felt like he was lying to Harold and Julia because
Right.
they didn't know who he was. But, like, I don't, of course, coming from a person who's just looking from the outside in, I don't ever feel like Jude was deceiving them. I don't think that Harold and Julia adopted him with the pretenses of ignoring what happened in his past. Obviously,
Right.
they
And I feel
know,
like
like, mhm.
right. And I feel like even though he didn't say it, like they always had an idea.
Right. So Harold obviously was very sad that Jude died, never understanding the fact that Julia and Harold loved him for who he was. And so Harold believes, like, he sees himself as a failure as a father, basically never getting through to Jude that he loved him so much, regardless of anything that happened. And then Harold relates that many of Willem and Jude's friends group have died tragically young. Now, this actually shook me. I'm like, how did
Yeah.
Harold and Julia outlive everybody?
And JB.
Yeah, and JB, of course. So JB has a boyfriend. He's in great health, and he's the only one in the friend group who is left. And then Jude's while cleaning out Jude's apartment with Julia one day, Harold finally finds that one letter that was in the bookshelf. And oh, sorry, no, it was a recording. Yeah, it was a letter and a
It
recording
was, yeah,
on a
it was
disc.
both.
Yeah, and so basically, Harold closes the story, the whole novel, by telling Willem that in the last conversation he had with Jude, Jude told him the story about the time that the boys locked themselves out of Lisbonard Street and had to break in through the window. And Jude smiled, enjoying that memory. So,
Yeah, so I don't know. This book was like I think the ending, yeah, I was the same as you. I didn't expect everybody to basically die except for JB, Harold, and Julia. I mean, I'm glad that Harold and Julia lived, of course. And yeah, I'm glad JB lived too, but
are we
I don't know.
glad? Are we
Andy,
glad?
I know, I'm like, I don't want to say something too controversial. It's like we don't it's not like we didn't want JB to be the one survivor, but it's also like just ironic that out of everyone, JB was the one who survived, you know?
Right. And it's not even the fact that he survived, it's the fact that he survived and he's thriving.
Yes. And I think what was crazy though is that Andy was like in such good health and he
Yeah.
passed. And I was like, what the
If he
heck,
had cancer,
Nuggets?
right?
It was either cancer or stroke. I couldn't remember. But
Yeah, one or the other.
the book, guys, was not. easy to read by any means. So if you are wanting to read A Little Life, you're definitely going to have to be strong-hearted. I mean, I think me and you can both say
Mhm.
that we didn't necessarily cry in this book, but not to say it wasn't very sad. I think that we just cry for different reasons in books, and yeah, the
Mhm.
book was extremely up, down, then down, 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 and keep going down, down, down. But
Yeah.
when you're in the
I-
constant state of down, I feel like
yeah.
you kind of get used to it.
I also feel like we didn't cry because we kept expecting it. And
Yeah.
I feel like it sucks because like we were really introduced to the book, well, I was at least, through TikTok, and it was only the
Mhm.
parts where, oh, I just read this part of A Little Life and now I'm sobbing and X, Y, and Z. And like I feel like it's because I expected it so much that
Yeah.
it never happened for me. So
I agree. Like we kind of anticipated, like, and I think, like we said before, if we had not been introduced to this book from TikTok, I think maybe we would have shed a tear. Like maybe one single tear would have trickled down. But
right,
because we were expecting the whole time from TikTok that it was going to be sad, we just didn't cry. But I mean, that's okay,
right.
guys. We're not heartless, we promise.
Yeah. And overall, it truly was a really good book. Like honestly, I really really liked it. The
Me
content,
too.
like you said, it was really heavy, but it was such like a well-written book, and like
Hmm.
all the different viewpoints and all of this was so interesting. I've never read a book like that, so it was really good. Honestly, 10 out of 10 would recommend.
Same. I honestly would give this a 5 star because of the fact that, like, 5 out of 5, because of the fact that it was well written, it was unique, it definitely took you on like an emotional roller coaster. And I feel like we actually, at the end of this book, I don't think I have a question that is unanswered. Like, I feel like the author
Right.
tied everything in the end, so you know exactly what happened, you know where everyone's at, and you know who survived, and you know that Jude
Yeah.
kind of healed from his past in a sense by allowing him to open up. So I think that the book did a
Yeah.
very good job. Like, you're not sitting here wondering, like, what the heck, you know?
Right. And quite frankly, she killed everybody off. And I feel like at that point, you can't, there's nothing left to say. Like, she killed everybody off and boom, that was it. So,
Yep. So here we are, suffering from the repercussions of finishing another good book. But I mean, it's okay. We have more books coming up. And of course, if you guys have
yeah.
listened to our Judge a Book by its cover, we have plenty of API stuff that will maybe not be.
Yes.
I don't think anything will be heavier than this book. Honestly,
Right.
this set a very high bar for emotional. So
Definitely. Definitely. And plus, it's a great way. I mean, not a great way. Like, this book was not like great in that way. But since we are in AAPI month, we're ending A Little Life and she is an Asian author. So that is great.
yes. So, with that being said, though, thank you guys for following us on this very emotional, long journey, which is A Little Life. We hope that you guys will
Yes.
tune in because we will have a Spark Notes But Better kind of like one big chat about Dial A for Aunties, which is the first book we had chosen to actually read during API month. And that was such a pleasure to read. So, we're excited
Oh
to
my
kind of jump
gosh.
ship there. I know. We're excited to jump ship there and hope that you guys have enjoyed the experience of reading not only A Little Life, but Lunar Love with us as well.
Yes. So thank
Yay.
you so much for tuning in with us, and we hope to talk to you guys soon.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.